The lawyer's voice did not shake. The estate includes one controlling stake in Honridge Logistics, 3 commercial properties, liquid assets of $82 million, and one outstanding corporate liability totaling $50 million. The room went silent. Then my younger brother laughed. Dead. Ethan leaned back in his chair as if he'd just heard a joke. Dad must have made a mistake. My mother turned sharply toward the lawyer. There has to be another document. There isn't. The lawyer slid another folder across the polished conference table. Mr. Richard Hayes left 2 separate inheritance options. Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. For 28 years, everyone in this family assumed I would accept whatever burden came with the Hayes name. I was the eldest son, the dependable one, the one who fixed every disaster Ethan created, the one who signed guarantees when banks refused to trust him, the one who stayed up nights rebuilding damaged business relationships while Ethan smiled from magazine covers. My father had always said the company belonged to the family. What he never said was which family member would pay for its mistakes. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Option 1. Mr. Adrian Hayes receives full ownership of the estate, including all assets and all liabilities. He paused. Option 2. Mr. Adrian Hayes formally renounces his inheritance. In that event, according to Mr. Hayes' will, all assets and liabilities pass to the second beneficiary, Mr. Ethan Hayes. Silence. Heavy. Oppressive. My mother's expression hardened immediately. Adrian. That single word already carried an order. You'll take it. Not a question. Not even a request. I looked toward my father's portrait hanging above the fireplace. Even in death, he looked as stern as ever. I remembered every conversation we'd had during the last 10 years. You're the older brother. Your responsibility comes first. Your brother needs more guidance. Guidance. That word had cost me promotions, relationships, friendships, entire years of my life. Whenever Ethan failed, I repaired it. Whenever he overspent, I worked overtime. Whenever investors threatened lawsuits, I negotiated until dawn. And every success afterward became Ethan's achievement. The lawyer cleared his throat. There is one condition. Everyone looked back at him. The inheritance decision must be made today. My aunt frowned. That's unusually fast. It was Mr. Hayes' personal instruction. My mother's hand landed on mine. Cold. Firm. You know your father trusted you. Trusted. No. Used. Across the table, Ethan forced a humble smile that fooled everyone except me. Brother, if Dad wanted you to inherit, I won't argue. His eyes said something entirely different. Take it. Take everything. Like you always do. I stared at the thick contract. $50 million. Most people only heard the number. I saw the structure. Corporate guarantees. Cross-default clauses. Personally secured obligations. If I signed, one default could erase everything I owned. Even worse, the debt wasn't due gradually. Several major payments matured within 6 months. A strange detail caught my attention. The balance sheets looked incomplete. Certain subsidiaries had disappeared. Several profitable shipping routes weren't listed. The numbers didn't fit. Someone had rearranged the company before my father's death. My pulse slowed. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The old Adrian would have signed first. Asked questions later. Because family came first. Because sacrifice was expected. Because saying no had never been an option. The room waited. Mother squeezed my hand harder. Don't embarrass your father's memory. My uncle nodded. We all know you're capable. Another translation. You're disposable. I slowly removed my hand from hers. For the first time in years, I smiled. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was simply relieved. I choose option 2. No one reacted. For 3 full seconds. Then chaos erupted. What? Mother stood so abruptly her chair crashed backward. You ungrateful child. Ethan blinked twice. His confident smile disappeared. What are you saying? I'm declining the inheritance. The lawyer looked directly into my eyes. To confirm, Mr. Adrian Hayes, you voluntarily renounce all claims to the Hayes estate? I do. You understand this decision is irreversible? I understand. Mother grabbed my arm. Have you lost your mind? I've finally found it. Her nails dug into my sleeve. $50 million in debt, means nothing compared to the company's assets. I looked at her quietly. If that's true, I turned toward Ethan. Then, congratulations. His face had become unnaturally pale. He wasn't stupid. He understood business well enough to know one fact. People rarely attach enormous debts to healthy companies. Something beneath the surface was rotting. He swallowed. Brother, maybe we should discuss this privately. No. The lawyer opened another folder. According to the will, Mr. Ethan Hayes automatically becomes sole heir upon confirmation. Mother immediately grabbed Ethan's shoulder. Accept it. He hesitated, only for a second, then agreed. I accept. The lawyer slid the contract toward him. As Ethan signed his name, I noticed something peculiar. The lawyer looked at me. Just once. A long, meaningful glance. As though he had expected this outcome. As though my father had expected it too. The signature dried. The inheritance transferred. The Hayes fortune and $50 million in obligations now belonged entirely to my brother. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me. Not because they accepted my decision, because they were too busy celebrating Ethan's victory. Behind me, champagne corks popped. Congratulations echoed through the mansion. Someone laughed. Someone toasted the future. No one noticed that the lawyer quietly placed a sealed envelope into his briefcase instead of handing it to Ethan. I noticed, and the expression on the lawyer's face told me one thing. The real inheritance hadn't appeared yet. Rain began falling before I reached my car. Not a violent storm, just enough to blur the mansion behind me until it became little more than a gray silhouette. For years, I had imagined walking away from that house. I expected anger. Instead, I felt astonishingly light. My phone vibrated before I even started the engine. Mother, I'll let it ring. Again, again, again. By the sixth call, she sent a message. Come back immediately. A minute later came another. Your brother needs you to review the financing documents. I laughed quietly. Not even an hour had passed. The inheritance wasn't officially recorded with the banks yet, and already they wanted me to clean up the paperwork. I placed the phone face down. For once, someone else could carry the family name. An hour later, I unlocked the apartment I'd barely seen during the past year. It wasn't luxurious, just a modest place close to downtown. The refrigerator held little besides bottled water and instant noodles. The dining table was buried beneath unopened mail. I had been living inside conference rooms for so long that this place had become nothing more than a place to sleep. My gaze drifted to a dusty guitar leaning against the wall. I hadn't touched it in 6 years. Ethan had wanted a music studio. I had sold my own instruments to help fund it. The studio failed within 8 months. No one apologized. The doorbell rang. I frowned. Almost no one knew this address. When I opened the door, the lawyer from earlier stood outside, umbrella folded neatly beneath one arm. Mr. Adrian Hayes, I assumed you'd be celebrating with my family. I don't work for your family. His expression remained unreadable. I work for your father. Past tense. He stepped inside only after I nodded. From his briefcase, he removed the sealed envelope I had noticed earlier. This was to be delivered only if you rejected the inheritance. I stared at the envelope. My name was written in my father's unmistakable handwriting. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My father had prepared this, specifically for the possibility that I walked away. You knew? I asked. The lawyer nodded once. I knew there were 2 possible futures. What about the debt? I'm not permitted to answer. He placed the envelope on the table. My instructions end here. He left without another word. The apartment fell silent again. Rain tapped softly against the windows. My fingers hesitated before breaking the wax seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Adrian, if you're reading this, then you've finally chosen yourself instead of this family. If so, you have done something I spent 20 years hoping you would someday have the strength to do. I froze. My father had wanted this? I continued reading. You probably hate me. You have every reason to. There are truths I could never explain while I was alive. Not because I lacked the courage, but because someone was always listening. A chill crept through my spine. Someone? The next paragraph had been underlined twice. Do not trust the company's financial statements from the last 3 years, especially those signed by the chief financial officer, the CFO, Daniel Mercer, a man my mother had hired, a man Ethan insisted was indispensable. The letter continued. The debt is real, but it did not begin with me. Someone buried losses beneath shell companies until escape became impossible. I tried to contain it. I failed. My hands tightened around the paper. The missing subsidiaries, the vanished shipping routes, they hadn't disappeared. Someone had moved them. Another page slipped from the envelope. A list of account numbers, unknown company names, transfer dates. Every transfer occurred after Ethan joined the executive board. A knock interrupted my thoughts. 3 sharp knocks. Not the lawyer. I opened the door halfway. A young woman in a dark business suit stood there, rain dripping from her umbrella. I apologized for arriving unannounced. Her voice was calm. My name is Claire Donovan. She handed me a business card. Forensic accountant. I've been trying to reach your father for 8 months. My heartbeat quickened. He passed away. I know. She looked directly into my eyes. I also know someone is about to lose $50 million. She glanced toward the envelope in my hand. And unless we act carefully, they're going to lose much more. Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't my mother. It was Ethan. I answered. His breathing was uneven. Brother, the confidence from earlier had vanished. The banks just froze every corporate account. A loud argument echoed in the background. Someone shouted legal terms. Someone else screamed that payroll couldn't be processed. Then Ethan whispered words I had never imagined hearing from him. Please. The line crackled. I don't know what to do. Outside my apartment window, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, Claire quietly closed the apartment door behind her. Don't answer too quickly, she said, because from this moment forward, every decision you refuse to make will force someone else to face the consequences they spent years pushing onto you. I looked at my father's letter. Then the phone still pressed against my ear. For the first time in my life, saving my family was no longer my responsibility. Please. Ethan's voice cracked again, softer this time. I don't know what to do. For years, hearing those words had triggered the same instinct. Fix it. Protect him. Take responsibility. My mouth opened on its own. Then Claire quietly slid my father's letter across the table until the underlined sentence rested directly beneath my eyes. Do not save people before learning who pushed them into the fire. I closed my eyes. When I spoke again, my voice surprised even me. You inherited the company. Silence. So handle it. Brother, you wanted the position. I didn't know. No. I stood by the rain-soaked window. You never wanted to know. The line went dead. Not because I hung up. Because Ethan had, for the first time in our lives. He had no older brother standing between him and reality. Claire watched me carefully. You expected that to hurt more. I let out a slow breath. I expected guilt. And it hasn't arrived. She nodded as though she'd seen this before. Toxic responsibility often disguises itself as love. She placed several folders on my table. I didn't come here merely because of your father. The files were filled with shipping records, offshore registrations, warehouse inventories, and dozens of corporate ownership charts. I've spent 8 months tracing missing assets. She pointed toward one company, Blue Horizon Logistics. I frowned. It never appeared in our annual reports. It couldn't. She flipped another page. It doesn't officially exist. My eyes narrowed, but it owns 42% of the profitable eastern shipping routes. I stared. Those routes alone generated tens of millions every year. They were transferred out of Hayes Logistics 18 months ago. Who authorized it? Claire met my gaze. The signature belongs to Daniel Mercer, the CFO, officially. She slid another document toward me. But the approval email originated from Ethan's executive account. The room became perfectly still. I don't believe Ethan designed this. Neither did I. He was reckless, impulsive, greedy, but complex financial fraud? No, someone smarter had been steering him. Claire seemed to reach the same conclusion. He may be guilty. She paused, without understanding the full crime. Across town, the emergency board meeting had already begun. I knew because my phone buzzed with message after message from former colleagues. Banks suspended all revolving credit. Auditors arrived without notice. Employees are panicking. Where are you? I answered none of them. Instead, Claire and I continued reviewing the documents. One anomaly after another emerged. Warehouses sold below market value. Cargo insurance canceled. Loans refinanced through unfamiliar lenders. Every trail eventually circled back toward Mercer, but never directly, always through intermediaries, as though someone had spent years preparing an escape. By evening, another visitor arrived. This one didn't knock politely. The apartment door flew open before I reached it. Mother. Her face was pale with fury. There you are. She marched inside without permission. Claire calmly stepped aside. Mother barely noticed her. What have you done? I declined an inheritance. You abandoned your family. I walked away. You ruined your brother. I almost laughed. Ethan signed willingly. You manipulated him. My patience thinned. Did I force his hand? She hesitated. No. Did I hide the debt? No. Then what exactly did I do? Her lips trembled. You should have protected him. There it was. The sentence that had defined my entire life. Not love. Not fairness. Duty. Infinite. Unquestionable. Always one-sided. I walked toward the bookshelf. From an old drawer, I removed a faded notebook. Mother frowned. What is that? My expense journal. She looked confused. I opened the first page. Age 19. Paid Ethan's gambling debt, $12,400. Next page. Covered luxury car loan, $38,000. Next. Repaid investor settlement, $410,000. Another. Hundreds of entries. Every sacrifice carefully recorded because accountants document losses. Even personal ones. I handed her the notebook. She flipped through it. Slower and slower. I don't remember these. I do. She swallowed. I did all this because everyone told me family came first. I gently took the notebook back. But somehow, I smiled sadly. Family only meant me sacrificing for Ethan. She couldn't answer. Because there wasn't one. After several long seconds, she whispered, He's frightened. So was I. She looked down. For years. Those words landed harder than shouting ever could. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Then her phone rang. She answered immediately. Her expression collapsed. What? A pause. No. Another pause. That's impossible. She lowered the phone with trembling fingers. The tax authority. Her voice barely emerged. They've frozen several personal accounts. Claire quietly asked, Whose? Mother looked directly at me. Mine. Claire didn't appear surprised. They're widening the investigation. Mother's breathing became uneven. This has to be a mistake. Claire calmly replied. Fraud investigations rarely begin with mistakes. Mother stared at me as though expecting reassurance. An explanation. A solution. Instead, I simply remained silent. She left without another accusation. Without another demand. Only the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. The apartment felt strangely peaceful afterward. Claire folded another document. They've started much sooner than I expected. You knew this would happen? I knew someone reported financial irregularities. Who? She smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd ask. She reached into her briefcase, then placed a confidential envelope on the table. The sender's name made my pulse stop. Richard Hayes. My father had filed the first report months before he died, and, according to the date stamped across the document, he had accused someone inside his own company. The confidential report contained only 4 pages, but every line carried the weight of years. My father had written in precise, restrained language, avoiding emotion as if afraid even paper might betray him. I believe Hayes Logistics has been systematically stripped of profitable assets through concealed transactions. I lack sufficient evidence to identify every participant. However, I fear the fraud extends beyond financial misconduct. Beyond financial misconduct? I looked at Claire. What does that mean? It means your father suspected someone wanted the company to fail. Why? She answered without hesitation. Because a bankrupt company is easier to acquire. The realization settled over me slowly. This wasn't merely theft. Someone wanted the Hayes empire destroyed from within. Not overnight. Patiently. Methodically. The next morning, every business headline carried the same story. Hayes Logistics under investigation. Major creditors demand immediate payment. Shares plunge 37%. Television analysts speculated endlessly. Corporate mismanagement. Economic downturn. Leadership transition. None of them knew the real story. Neither did Ethan. My phone remained strangely quiet until noon. Then an unfamiliar number appeared. I answered. Mr. Hayes? A deep male voice. My name is Victor Sloan. I don't believe we've met. We haven't. A brief pause. But we've both been watching the same company. I said nothing. I'd like to meet. I have no reason. You do. His voice lowered. Daniel Mercer doesn't work for himself. My grip tightened around the phone. He works for someone you've trusted since childhood. The line disconnected. No location. No explanation. Only a text arrived moments later. 7 p.m. Harbor District. Warehouse 19. Come alone. Claire immediately objected after reading it. It could be a trap. It probably is. Then don't go. I consider the message. If Mercer serves someone else. I know. She sighed. We need answers. 7 o'clock. Warehouse 19 stood abandoned beside rusting cargo cranes. Broken windows reflected the orange glow of sunset. Inside, dust floated through narrow beams of light. Only one man waited. Gray-haired, expensive overcoat, perfect posture. Victor Sloan. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he studied me for several quiet seconds. You look more like your mother. I've heard that. A shame. The bluntness almost made me smile. You wanted to meet. I wanted to see whether Richard's son inherited his judgment. And you walked away from $50 million in debt. He nodded approvingly. So perhaps you did. He handed me an old photograph. I frowned. It showed my father 20 years younger, standing beside another man, both smiling. Business partners. The second face felt oddly familiar. Who is he? Victor's expression hardened. Arthur Mercer. Daniel's father? Yes. A chill crawled through me. They built Hayes Logistics together. I've never heard his name. You weren't supposed to. Victor looked toward the dark harbor outside. Richard bought Arthur out after a bitter dispute. What dispute? Control. He met my eyes. Arthur believed profit mattered more than loyalty. And my father? He believed loyalty mattered more than profit. Victor gave a humorless laugh. They were both wrong. I waited. Victor continued. Arthur disappeared from public business shortly afterward. And Daniel? He inherited far more than his father's surname. Pieces began fitting together. Too neatly. Too perfectly. This started 20 years ago. Victor nodded once. Revenge rarely begins when people think it does. Before I could ask another question, a loud metallic crash echoed from outside the warehouse. Victor's expression changed instantly. They found us. What? Leave. Now. Several headlights swept across broken windows. Vehicle doors slammed. Footsteps. Many of them. Victor shoved a thick flash drive into my hand. Richard died before he could expose them. He stepped backward. You still can. What about you? I've already made my choice. Another crash. Closer. Victor pointed toward a rear exit. Run. I hesitated. For only a heartbeat. Then I ran through the narrow service corridor. Behind me, voices shouted. Glass shattered. A struggle erupted. Someone yelled Victor's name. Another demanded the flash drive. By the time I reached the alley, tires screamed against wet pavement. 3 black SUVs sped away from the warehouse. When I cautiously returned several minutes later, Victor Sloan was gone. So was every vehicle. Only one thing remained. A single broken pair of reading glasses lying on the warehouse floor beside a small trail of blood. I looked down at the flash drive, still clenched tightly in my hand. Whatever was inside, someone had been willing to kill for it. The flash drive felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its size, because somewhere behind me, a man had vanished trying to make sure it reached my hands. I didn't go home. Anyone watching Warehouse 19 would expect that. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city until midnight before pulling into the underground parking garage of an old office building Claire used for independent audits. She was already waiting. One look at the blood on my sleeve, and she stood. What happened? Emit Victor Sloan. Her expression changed immediately. You actually found him? I think someone else did too. Without another word, she locked the office door. The flash drive clicked in her laptop. A password prompt appeared. Encrypted, she murmured. I reached into my pocket. My father's letter. Near the bottom of the final page, one sentence suddenly caught my attention. The harbor always remembers October 17th. Claire looked at me. You think that's a password? It can't be coincidence. She typed. Harbor 1017. The screen unlocked. Neither of us spoke. Hundreds of folders appeared. Financial statements. Email archives. Phone recordings. Corporate contracts. Security camera footage. Years of evidence. Claire whispered, My God. The first folder contained internal emails. Not between executives. Between Daniel Mercer and an anonymous account identified only as A. One message read, Continue transferring profitable routes. Richard suspects nothing. Adrian remains occupied cleaning Ethan's mistakes. I stared at the words. Occupied. That was exactly what I had been. Every crisis Ethan caused had distracted me from seeing the larger one. Another email. Keep Ethan ambitious. The older brother will always repair the damage. Claire slowly closed her eyes. They studied your family. No. I swallowed. They used it. The next folder contained surveillance photographs. My father meeting Victor Sloan. Late-night meetings with government investigators. Warehouse inspections. Secret interviews. Every date matched periods when father had claimed he was traveling for business. He hadn't been expanding the company. He had been trying to save it. I leaned back heavily. All those years, I had believed he simply trusted Ethan more. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps he'd been running out of time. Claire opened another folder. Voice recordings. The first audio crackled with static. Then my father's voice emerged. Tired. Older. If anything happens to me, Adrian must never inherit this company. My heartbeat stopped. He'll sacrifice himself before asking questions. A second voice answered. Victor Sloan, you still believe he'll walk away? I raise him to carry everyone's burdens. A painful pause. I only pray he someday refuses. The recording ended. I couldn't breathe. For years, I had mistaken my father's silence for indifference. Perhaps it had been desperation. Claire quietly placed a cup of coffee beside me. You needed to hear that. I needed him to say it while he was alive. She didn't disagree. At dawn, another recording caught our attention. This one was newer. Only 3 weeks before father's death. Daniel Mercer speaking on the phone. The inheritance will solve everything. A distorted voice answered. Explain. Ethan will accept the assets. And Adrian? He'll clean up the debt like always. Daniel laughed softly. If not, a pause. Then Ethan becomes the perfect scapegoat. Claire replayed the sentence. Twice. 3 times. Perfect scapegoat. I looked toward the growing sunlight beyond the office windows. They planned for both outcomes. Yes. If I accepted, you would have drowned beneath the debt. And if I refused, Ethan inherited the disaster. Neither outcome protected our family. Someone wanted every Hayes destroyed. My phone suddenly vibrated. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mr. Hayes. A woman. Professional. This is Detective Elena Brooks. My shoulders stiffened. We need to discuss Richard Hayes. I'm listening. We've officially reopened the investigation into his death. Claire immediately looked up. Father's death had been ruled a heart attack. Months ago. What changed? The detective answered carefully. We received new evidence suggesting Mr. Hayes may have been under significant external pressure before he died. Pressure, not murder. Not yet. I'd like to meet. When? This morning. The police headquarters felt colder than I remembered. Detective Brooks wasn't what I expected. Young, sharp-eyed, calm. She placed a thin folder on the table. Before asking questions, she slid a photograph toward me. My father's office. Destroyed. Drawers emptied. Files missing. This happened the night after his funeral. I frowned. We thought nothing had been stolen. Someone knew exactly what to take. She studied my expression. Did your father ever mention hidden financial records? I hesitated, then remembered the flash drive. No, a lie. Necessary. She nodded slowly. As expected. You anticipated that answer? I anticipated your caution. She leaned forward. Mr. Hayes. Her voice lowered. Someone inside your family has been feeding information to Daniel Mercer. The words settled between us like ice. Someone inside my family. I thought first of Ethan, then immediately rejected it. He was careless, not calculating. Mother? She trusted Mercer far too much. But betrayal required intent. Did she have it? Detective Brooks opened another folder. This isn't enough to arrest anyone. What is it? Phone records. Several numbers were highlighted. One belonged to Daniel Mercer. Another made my stomach tighten. Mother's private phone. How often? I asked quietly. Brooks answered without emotion. 143 calls over the past 18 months. Claire looked stunned. I thought Mercer reported directly to the board. He did. Brooks folded her hands. So why was he speaking privately with Mrs. Hayes more than anyone else? I had no answer, because I didn't want the obvious one. When I returned home that evening, the apartment hallway was strangely crowded. Reporters, camera crews, neighbors whispering, the moment they recognized me. Mr. Hayes, did you abandon the company knowing it would collapse? Did your father leave hidden assets? Were you involved in fraudulent transfers? Microphones surrounded me. Flashes exploded. I said only one sentence. I no longer represent Hayes Logistics. Then I walked inside. The door closed. Silence returned. Claire sighed. They've made you part of the story. That's intentional. By whom? The same people controlling the narrative. If the public blamed me, no one would ask better questions. Late that night, my apartment intercom rang. Not once. Repeatedly. When I checked the security monitor, Ethan stood downstairs. Alone. His suit was wrinkled. His tie hung loose. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. He looked 10 years older. I let him in. He entered without speaking. Then noticed Claire. I didn't know you had company. State your reason. He laughed bitterly. Straight to business. We've never really had anything else. That hurt him. I saw it. He sat heavily on the couch. The company can't pay salaries next week. I remained silent. The banks rejected every restructuring proposal. Silence. The board resigned. Still nothing. Finally, he looked directly at me. I think someone set me up. Claire and I exchanged a glance. He was finally seeing the truth. I was stupid. His voice became quieter. I thought inheriting the company meant winning. He rubbed both hands across his face. I didn't even read every page before signing. No, I answered calmly. You never had to. His eyes reddened. You're right. A long silence followed. Then he whispered something I had waited years to hear. I'm sorry. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just exhausted. I kept believing everyone who told me I deserved more. He laughed at himself. I never asked who was paying for it. For the first time in years, I saw not my rival, but my younger brother. Flawed. Spoiled. Manipulated. Human. I can't undo what I've done. He looked down. But tell me honestly. His voice trembled. Did Dad really leave me this company because he believed in me? The room fell painfully quiet. I remember the recordings, the emails, the trap, my father's hope that I would walk away. I couldn't answer that question honestly without destroying what remained of Ethan. So I chose another truth. He gave you a choice. Ethan frowned. What choice? What you become after everything falls apart. Tears filled his eyes. He nodded once, then stood. As he reached the door, he hesitated. Daniel resigned this afternoon. Claire immediately looked up. When? An hour ago. Did anyone stop him? He disappeared. The apartment became completely silent. Mercer hadn't fled because the company was collapsing. He fled because something had frightened him. Ethan looked back one final time. If you ever find out who did this. His jaw tightened. Don't save them. He left. The door clicked shut. Claire slowly turned toward me. That apology was real. Yes, but it's too late. I looked out at the city lights. No. For what? For pretending we still don't know where to look next. I reached into the folder Victor Sloan had entrusted to me. At the very bottom, Beneath dozens of financial records lay one final document I hadn't noticed before. A shareholder agreement, signed 20 years earlier. 3 signatures. Richard Hayes, Arthur Mercer, and my mother's. I stared at the page. My pulse slowed. Claire whispered the question I no longer could. Why was your mother secretly a founding shareholder? The answer threatened to destroy everything I believed about my family. The signature wasn't forged. I checked it 3 times. Compared it to old birthday cards my mother had written decades ago. The curve of the M. The sharp downward stroke on the H. It was hers. Claire looked at me carefully. You've gone pale. I slid the shareholder agreement across the table. My mother owned part of Hayes Logistics before I was born. She studied the document. 5%. I nodded. Why would no one ever mention this? Because someone wanted history rewritten. The agreement was dated 29 years earlier. At the bottom was a handwritten clause. Any transfer of founding shares requires unanimous written consent of all original partners. Richard Hayes, Arthur Mercer, Margaret Hayes. 3 signatures. 3 founders. 3 people who had built the company together. My father had never built Hayes Logistics alone. Everything I believed about our family's past had been carefully edited. Claire opened another folder from the flash drive. There may be more. Hidden among old accounting ledgers was a scanned newspaper clipping. Local shipping startup secures first major contract. The accompanying photograph showed the same 3 people. My father, Arthur Mercer, my mother, all smiling, young, hopeful, equal. I stared at my mother's face. She looked happier than I had ever known her. What happened? Claire quietly answered. That's the question. The next morning, I requested a meeting. Not at the mansion, not at the company. At a small riverside cafe my parents had once visited every anniversary. Mother arrived 20 minutes late. She looked exhausted. The investigation had aged her overnight. She sat without ordering coffee. You wanted to see me. I placed the shareholder agreement on the table. Her fingers froze. For the first time since Father's funeral, I saw genuine fear. Where did you get this? So it's real. She closed her eyes. Adrian. No. I leaned forward. I've spent my entire life answering your questions. My turn. Her breathing became uneven. You helped create Hayes Logistics? Yes. You knew Arthur Mercer? Yes. You hid both? Yes. Every answer landed harder than the last. The silence stretched until she whispered. I never wanted either of you involved. Then why were we? She looked toward the river instead of me. Because adults make decisions that children inherit. For nearly a minute, she said nothing. Then the wall she'd built over decades finally cracked. When your father and Arthur founded the company, her voice was distant. They were inseparable. They trusted each other. They trusted me. She smiled sadly. We had nothing. A rented warehouse. 2 trucks. And impossible dreams. Her eyes filled with tears. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Success changes people. I listened without interrupting. Arthur wanted aggressive expansion. Your father wanted stability. They argued every week. The board divided. So did our families. She gripped her coffee cup. Then Arthur discovered something. What? He believed Richard intended to buy him out. Was he right? She looked directly into my eyes. No, but someone convinced him otherwise. My pulse quickened. Who? She answered with visible reluctance. Daniel. The name hung heavily between us. Daniel Mercer was already working with his father. Fresh out of university, he handled financial projections. She laughed bitterly. We thought he was brilliant. He was. Just not for us. Arthur demanded control. Richard refused. So Arthur sold his shares. But not willingly. Mother's voice cracked. He believed Richard betrayed him. And after that, he disappeared. No calls. No meetings. No explanations. What about Daniel? He stayed. I frowned. He remained inside the company. She nodded. We believed he wanted to honor his father's work. Instead, he had spent 20 years dismantling it. I reached into my briefcase, then quietly placed several printed emails between us. Mother's face drained of color. Private conversations between her and Daniel. She stared in disbelief. Her lips trembled. I never deleted these. You forgot company backups exist. She began reading. One email, then another, then another. Each message became increasingly desperate. Daniel, Richard refuses to tell me what's happening. Daniel, are the banks really threatening us? Daniel, please don't let the company collapse. I looked at her carefully. You trusted him. I thought he was helping. You told him everything. Fresh tears rolled down her face. I didn't know. No, you never did. She covered her mouth. I gave him access. You gave him information. I told him every disagreement your father and I had. Every board discussion. Every financing concern. Every personal weakness. Daniel hadn't needed spies. He'd had my mother, without her ever realizing it. Her shoulders shook violently. I destroyed us. You were used. I still destroyed us. For the first time in years, I reached across the table and gently held her hand. Not because everything was forgiven, because grief deserved honesty. You made terrible choices. She nodded. I know. But someone spent decades making sure those choices felt reasonable. She cried openly. Not for the company. Not for the money. For the family she slowly realized had been manipulated long before it fell apart. 3 days later, the investigation exploded. Detective Brooks called just after sunrise. We've located Daniel Mercer. Alive. For now. Where? He attempted to board a private jet. Did you arrest him? No. My heart sank. He escaped before our team arrived. Claire looked up from her laptop. How? Brooks answered grimly. Someone warned him. Another leak. Another betrayal. But this time, it wasn't from my family. The flash drive still contained hundreds of unopened files. Claire spent hours organizing them. Around noon, she suddenly stopped typing. Adrian. What? I found payroll records. So, they don't match. She enlarged the spreadsheet. Daniel Mercer had been receiving enormous consulting payments. Not from Hayes Logistics. From another corporation. Mercer Global Holdings. I frowned. Arthur's company. Claire searched corporate registrations. No. She slowly turned the monitor toward me. It was incorporated only 6 years ago. Owner. She clicked once. A single name appeared. Leonard Cross. I had never heard of him. Claire had. Her expression hardened. He specializes in hostile acquisitions. He's not a businessman. What is he? A corporate predator. She opened another database. Over the past 15 years, 5 companies had collapsed. Every one eventually purchased by Leonard Cross for a fraction of its value. Hayes Logistics would have been the 6th. Daniel Mercer hadn't been avenging his father. He'd been working for someone who turned ruined businesses into personal empires. Arthur Mercer had simply provided the perfect emotional story. That afternoon, Detective Brooks requested an emergency meeting. The conference room was filled with investigators, financial analysts, federal prosecutors. Evidence boxes lined one wall. Brooks stood before a projector. We've reconstructed the fraud. One slide after another illuminated the room. Asset transfers, shell corporations, fabricated debt, hidden ownership chains. Every trail eventually converged on Leonard Cross. Then came the final slide. A timeline. 20 years of planning. 10 years of preparation. 6 years of active theft. Brooks looked toward me. Without the evidence provided by Richard Hayes. She paused. And completed by Adrian Hayes. She nodded respectfully. This case would never have been proven. The room remained silent. Not celebratory. Respectful. Because everyone understood the cost. Arrest warrants were signed before sunset. News stations interrupted regular programming. Financial markets reacted immediately. Authorities froze dozens of accounts. International agencies joined the investigation. The trap finally closed. That evening, I stood outside the Hayes mansion for the first time since refusing the inheritance. It looked smaller now, not because it had changed, because I had. Inside, Mother quietly packed old photographs into cardboard boxes. Ethan sorted company files for investigators without complaint. Neither spoke when I entered. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. They arrested Leonard Cross. I nodded. They found Daniel too. Alive. Barely. He had surrendered after discovering every offshore account had been frozen. There was nowhere left to run. Mother looked at Father's portrait hanging above the fireplace. He tried to protect us. Yes. I never understood. You do now? She smiled through tears. Too late. No. I looked around the quiet mansion, the expensive furniture, the empty hallways, the house that had once demanded endless sacrifice. It's late, I corrected gently. Not too late. Ethan walked toward me. I've already signed documents surrendering control of the company to the court. You didn't have to. I know. He looked at Father's portrait. For once. He smiled sadly. I wanted to make the right decision before someone asked me. Outside, news helicopters circled above the city. Inside, for the first time in decades, no one argued. No one manipulated. No one demanded sacrifice. The lies had finally collapsed. And with them, the prison our family had mistaken for home. The mansion sold 4 months later. Not because the court demanded it, because none of us wanted to live inside a museum of old mistakes. The auction lasted less than an hour. Collectors admired the architecture. Investors admired the location. None of them knew how many arguments those walls had absorbed. When the final bid was accepted, Mother quietly removed the house keys from her purse. She held them for a long moment, then placed them on the conference table without looking back. I thought letting go would hurt more. It still hurts, I said. It just hurts honestly now. She nodded. There were no dramatic tears. Some grief arrived too late for that. Hayes Logistics no longer belonged to the Hayes family. The courts approved a restructuring plan that preserved thousands of employees' jobs while selling portions of the business to several independent shipping firms. No single buyer gained complete control. That had been Richard Hayes' final recommendation in his confidential report. If the company cannot survive as ours, let it survive without becoming anyone's weapon. The recommendation was accepted unanimously. For the first time in years, the company existed without someone trying to own everyone inside it. I spent my mornings in an unfamiliar way. Walking. No conference calls. No emergency meetings. No crisis messages before sunrise. At first, the silence felt unnatural. Then it became addictive. One morning, I found myself standing outside a small music store. The dusty guitar in my apartment came to mind. Without thinking too much, I stepped inside. The owner smiled. Looking for anything specific? I looked around the room, filled with instruments. Something I stopped playing a long time ago. An hour later, I left carrying a guitar case. Not because I wanted to become a musician, because I wanted to remember the version of myself that had existed before responsibility consumed everything. Claire laughed when she saw it. I was wondering when you'd buy one. You knew? You always looked at guitars whenever we walked past music shops. I never noticed. You were usually distracted by phone calls. She smiled gently. Now you notice. Her office had become quieter too. The investigation was nearing its conclusion. Most of the financial reconstruction was finished. Stacks of evidence had become neatly labeled archive boxes. Claire closed another file. Do you know what happens next? Trials. I mean for you. I looked through the office window toward the city. I don't. Good. I frowned. She continued. People who always live for others usually panic when they're finally free. I thought freedom would come with instructions. It doesn't. She smiled. You get to write them yourself. Weeks later, Detective Brooks invited me to attend the first public hearing. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, former executives, employees, investors. Daniel Mercer entered under heavy security. He no longer looked brilliant, only tired. Years of carefully constructed confidence had disappeared. When our eyes met, he looked away first. Leonard Cross entered moments later. He remained composed, even arrogant, until prosecutors began presenting the evidence. Email after email, transfer after transfer, hidden ownership structures, secret contracts. The flash drive, Victor Sloan's testimony, recorded years earlier. My father's confidential reports. The courtroom atmosphere changed with every exhibit. By afternoon, Leonard Cross no longer smiled. During a recess, Detective Brooks approached me. They've both requested plea negotiations. So soon. The evidence is overwhelming. She hesitated. There's something else. What? Victor Sloan. I stopped walking. What about him? We found him. My heartbeat quickened. Alive. She smiled for the first time since we'd met. Very much alive. Victor entered a private interview room later that afternoon. His left arm rested in a sling. Several bruises remained visible. You disappeared. They expected me to. He smiled faintly. I've spent 20 years learning how to disappear. I laughed despite myself. It worked. He sat across from me. Richard would have been proud. The words caught me off guard. He failed. Victor shook his head. No. He ran out of time. There's a difference. Silence settled comfortably between us. He blamed himself, I admitted. He blamed everyone except the people responsible. Victor sighed. That was Richard's greatest strength. And his greatest weakness. Before leaving, Victor handed me a worn leather notebook. What is this? Your father's. I opened the first page. Not financial records. Not business plans. Personal notes. Scattered thoughts. Small observations. One line had been written years before. Adrian apologized today for something that wasn't his fault. I need to teach him that love is not measured by sacrifice. Another. He smiles less each year. Another. If I ever lose this company, I pray I don't lose my son with it. The words blurred. I closed the notebook carefully. For years I had searched for evidence my father loved me. It had been there all along, hidden between unfinished sentences. Spring arrived quietly. The city looked different when I wasn't racing through it. Trees I had never noticed bloomed outside my apartment. The coffee shop owner downstairs finally learned my name. Life wasn't suddenly perfect. It was simply mine. Mother moved into a modest townhouse on the edge of the city. She insisted on furnishing it herself. Not with expensive antiques. With ordinary furniture she actually liked. One afternoon she invited Ethan and me for dinner. The meal wasn't elaborate. Homemade soup. Roasted vegetables. Fresh bread. Halfway through dinner she suddenly laughed. What? Ethan asked. I just realized. She smiled sheepishly. This is the first meal we've had together in years without anyone discussing business. We all looked at each other. She was right. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Ethan had changed more than any of us. He declined interviews, refused celebrity invitations, sold his sports cars. He accepted a junior operations position at a regional shipping cooperative under a different surname. No special treatment. No executive title. No inherited authority. One evening he stopped by my apartment carrying takeout boxes. I burned dinner. You cooked. I tried. I laughed. That's progress. He smiled. You know? He hesitated. I used to think you looked down on me. I never did. I know that now. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I looked down on myself. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he quietly added, I just hit it better. That confession explained more than years of arguments ever had. Claire eventually left corporate investigations. Too many spreadsheets. She claimed. What will you do? I asked. She placed a business proposal in front of me. Donovan and Hayes Financial Ethics Consulting. I blinked. You already printed the name. I was optimistic. You never asked me. I am now. The proposal wasn't about making millions. It focused on helping family businesses strengthen governance, detect fraud, and prevent the kinds of silent manipulation that had destroyed Hayes Logistics. I looked at the final page. Our mission statement read, Healthy businesses begin with honest relationships. I smiled. I'll need an office. I already rented one. You planned everything. I learned from accountants. For the first time in months, I laughed without restraint. The company grew slowly, deliberately. Our first clients weren't wealthy corporations. They were struggling family-owned businesses. Parents, siblings, partners, people who still trusted one another enough to ask difficult questions. Sometimes we uncovered fraud. More often, we uncovered conversations that should have happened years earlier. Those became our greatest victories. One evening, after another long day, I returned home and opened my father's notebook again. The final page contained only one unfinished sentence. If Adrian ever learns to smile for himself. Nothing followed. The ink stopped abruptly. Perhaps he had been interrupted. Perhaps he had become too ill to continue. I picked up a pen. Carefully, respectfully, beneath his unfinished words, I wrote my own. Then everything we lost will have meant something. I closed the notebook. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the river. Inside, there were no debts waiting for me. No impossible expectations. No inheritance demanding another sacrifice. Only tomorrow. And for the first time in my life, tomorrow belonged to me. The verdict was scheduled for a gray Monday morning. By sunrise, every major news network had parked satellite trucks outside the federal courthouse. 5 years earlier, I would have stood inside surrounded by lawyers, carrying folders thick enough to hide my exhaustion. Today, I carried nothing except my father's notebook. The pages had softened from being opened so many times. Some scars deserved to be remembered, not relived. Security escorted everyone into the courtroom. The gallery was full. former employees, journalists, families whose retirement funds had survived because the fraud had finally been uncovered. Claire sat beside me. Detective Brooks occupied the first row behind the prosecution. Mother and Ethan arrived quietly. They didn't seek attention. For the first time in years, our family entered a room without trying to impress anyone. Leonard Cross was led inside first. His tailored suits had disappeared. The expensive confidence that once filled every room now looked strangely hollow. Daniel Mercer followed. His shoulders had collapsed inward. He looked 20 years older than when I had first known him. Neither man acknowledged me. Perhaps they couldn't. Perhaps they finally understood that I had never been their opponent. The truth had been. The judge entered. The courtroom stood. Then silence settled like a heavy curtain. One by one, the charges were read. Corporate fraud, market manipulation, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, international financial crimes. Each count represented years of carefully hidden choices. Each choice carried names. Employees who lost pensions, small suppliers forced into bankruptcy, families whose lives had been quietly dismantled while others became rich. The judge spoke calmly. No sentence imposed today can restore every loss. A pause. But justice is measured not only by restoration, but by accountability. Leonard Cross received multiple consecutive prison sentences. Most of his remaining assets were permanently seized. Daniel Mercer received a reduced sentence after fully cooperating with investigators and providing extensive testimony. Neither victory felt triumphant, only necessary. After the hearing, reporters rushed toward me. Mr. Hayes, do you feel vindicated? Will you reclaim your father's company? Do you forgive Daniel Mercer? I stopped walking. Hundreds of cameras focused on my face. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would want everyone to know I had been right. Instead, I answered differently. I didn't walk away because I wanted revenge. The crowd became still. I walked away because carrying someone else's choices was destroying my own life. Another pause. The people responsible have answered for what they did. I looked briefly toward the courthouse doors. My responsibility ended the day I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. No one asked another question. There wasn't anything left to add. Later that afternoon, I visited my father's grave alone. Fresh flowers already rested beside the stone. Mother must have come earlier. I placed the notebook gently against the granite. You were wrong about one thing. The wind rustled through nearby trees. You thought saving everyone was your greatest failure. I smiled faintly. It wasn't. You saved enough. I looked across the quiet cemetery. I just needed time to understand what you were trying to teach me. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt complete. As I turned to leave, footsteps approached behind me. It was Daniel Mercer, escorted by 2 correctional officers. He had requested permission to visit Arthur Mercer's grave before beginning his sentence. The cemetery had approved both visits on the same afternoon. Life possessed an odd sense of symmetry. He stopped several feet away. I don't expect forgiveness. You won't receive it. He nodded. I know. His voice sounded stripped of every defense. My father spent years telling me Richard Hayes stole everything from us. And you believed him. I wanted to. He lowered his eyes. It was easier than admitting he destroyed himself. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I spent my life avenging a lie. He walked away without another word. Watching him disappear between the rows of headstones, I realized something unexpected. Hatred had finally run out of work. 1 year later, the brass sign outside our office reflected the morning sun. Donovan and Hayes. Financial Ethics Consulting. The business had grown beyond anything Claire or I had planned. Not because we chased profit, because trust had become surprisingly rare and surprisingly valuable. Inside, young analysts debated governance policies instead of stock prices. Clients arrived carrying questions before crises. Families learned how to disagree without destroying one another. Some still failed. Most didn't. That was enough. Ethan eventually earned his first promotion. No inheritance. No shortcuts. His supervisor didn't even know who he really was until months later. When I congratulated him, he laughed. You know what my manager said? What? You work too hard. He shook his head with amused disbelief. I think that's the first compliment I've ever earned. It is. He grinned. And it feels better. Mother volunteered twice a week with a nonprofit organization that provided financial education for widows and retirees. One evening she confessed something quietly. I keep thinking about all the years I spent believing success meant protecting appearances. She looked around her modest living room. I've never slept better. Some lessons arrived painfully. They still arrived. Claire and I never needed dramatic promises. Mutual respect had always been enough. Some evenings, we worked late reviewing governance reports. Other evenings, we locked the office early and wandered through bookstores or outdoor concerts, speaking about everything except business. The future no longer demanded urgency. It invited patience. On the anniversary of my father's passing, our family gathered at the river where Hayes Logistics had first loaded its very first shipment decades earlier. No reporters came. No executives. Just four ordinary people carrying memories that finally belonged in the past instead of the present. Mother unfolded an old photograph. The same one Victor Sloan had shown me. 3 young founders. Richard Hayes, Arthur Mercer, Margaret Hayes, all smiling before ambition, fear, and misunderstanding had divided them. Ethan studied it quietly. They really believed they could build something good. They did. I answered. And for a while, they succeeded. We let the photograph rest between us, not as evidence, as history. That evening I returned home and opened my father's notebook one last time. Between its pages rested the original inheritance letter. The paper had yellowed slightly. The handwriting remained steady. I read the final sentence again. If you're reading this, then you've finally chosen yourself instead of this family. I smiled. He had been wrong. Not entirely. I hadn't chosen myself instead of my family. I had chosen a healthier way to love them. Without surrendering myself. Without carrying burdens that weren't mine. Without mistaking endless sacrifice for devotion. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the notebook. Then I put the notebook onto the highest shelf in my study. Not hidden. Not displayed. Simply kept. Like every meaningful chapter that had reached its proper ending. Outside, the city continued moving beneath a sky streaked with gold. Inside, there were no unpaid debts. No inheritance waiting behind sealed envelopes. No invisible chains disguised as duty. Only quiet. Only freedom. Only a life earned one honest choice at a time.